The stars above Haven's Rest burned with an unnatural light that night. What should have been peaceful darkness was instead filled with the orange glow of destruction raining down from space. Commander Vexthel stood on the bridge of his massive warship, watching the human colony world below through cold, calculating eyes. For 20 years, he had served the Zethkari Empire as one of their most feared warlords. His reputation preceded him across the galaxy. Entire civilizations surrendered rather than face his brutal efficiency. The humans of Haven's Rest would be no different. They were weak, emotional creatures who valued mercy over strength. At least that's what every Zethkari believed. The orbital bombardment was supposed to be routine, soften their defenses, land-ground forces, claim another victory for the Empire. Had done this hundreds of times before. But as his fleet positioned for the final assault, something went wrong. A brilliant flash erupted from the planet's surface. The humans had been hiding something, an ancient defense system that fired a concentrated energy beam straight up through the atmosphere. The beam struck Vextel's flagship with devastating force, tearing through its armored hull like paper. Alarms screamed throughout the ship as it began its death spiral toward the planet below. Vextel felt the deck tilting beneath his feet as artificial gravity failed. His officers scrambled to reach escape pods, but there wasn't time. The ship was coming down fast, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The impact was tremendous. The flagship carved a burning trench across the colony's outskirts before finally coming to rest against a hillside. Most of the crew died instantly. Vexel himself was trapped beneath twisted metal, his body broken and bleeding. As consciousness faded, he could hear the distant sounds of his surviving fleet continuing their attack on the human settlements. Dr. Luna Hayes, all day, had been working in the colony's emergency medical center when the attack began. She watched in horror as the alien warship crashed just outside the city limits, while others fled to shelters. She grabbed her medical kit and headed toward the crash site. People thought she was crazy, but Luna had taken an oath to save lives, all lives. The wreckage was still smoking when she arrived. She could hear groaning from inside the twisted hull, and her training kicked in. Someone was alive in there, and they needed help. It took her nearly an hour to find a way inside the destroyed ship, crawling through gaps in the metal that were barely wide enough for a human. What she found inside changed everything. The creature trapped beneath the debris was obviously not human, tall, with gray skin, and sharp features that spoke of a predator species. But Luna recognized the uniform markings. This was the enemy commander, the one responsible for the death. Raining down on her world, for a moment she hesitated. This alien had come here to destroy her people, her home. He would have killed her without a second thought. But as she looked at his broken body, all she could see was a patient who needed help. The Hippocratic Oath didn't care about species or politics. It only cared about preserving life. Luna worked through the night. Using every skill she had learned in 15 years of emergency medicine, she stabilized his internal bleeding, set his broken bones, and treated his burns with the limited supplies she had brought. It was delicate work. She had no idea about alien anatomy, but life was life. And she could recognize the signs of trauma in any species. When Vextel finally woke up, he expected to find himself in a human prison or torture chamber. Instead, he was lying on a clean bed in what appeared to be a medical facility. His wounds had been professionally treated, and though he was still in pain, he was clearly healing. The human who had saved him was sitting nearby, checking his vital signs on a portable monitor. She looked tired, exhausted actually, but her movements were gentle and careful. When she noticed he was awake, she didn't reach for a weapon or call for guards. Instead, she offered him water. "How are you feeling?" she asked in accented but understandable Zethkar. "You've been unconscious for almost 18 hours. Vexel tried to speak, but his throat was dry. She held a cup to his lips, helping him drink. The water was cool and clean, and he realized he was desperately thirsty. "Why?" he finally managed to croak out. "Why did you save me?" Luna Hayes looked at him with tired eyes. "Because you needed help," she said simply. "And because that's what doctors do." The warlord stared at her in confusion. In Zethkari culture, enemies were to be destroyed or dominated. The concept of showing mercy to someone who had tried to kill you was completely foreign to him. Yet here was this human female who had risked her life to save his. "You know who I am," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know," Luna replied. "You're Commander Vextel of the 7th Fleet. You've destroyed dozens of worlds. You came here to destroy mine." She paused, checking his bandages. "But right now, you're my patient. And I don't let patients die if I can help it." Outside the medical facility, the sound of distant explosions reminded them both that the war was still raging. Vextel's fleet continued their assault on the human settlements, believing their commander was dead. Soon, ground forces would arrive to finish what the orbital bombardment had started. "Your people are dying because of me," Vextel said quietly. "But you saved my life. I don't understand." Luna finished her examination and sat down in the chair beside his bed. "Maybe that's the difference between us," she said. "You see enemies to be destroyed. I see people who need help, even when that person is you." For the first time in his life, the great warlord Vextel had no answer. He had conquered worlds, commanded fleets, and struck fear into the hearts of entire species. But he had never encountered anything like this human, simple, inexplicable kindness. As dawn broke over Haven's Rest, bringing with it the sounds of approaching enemy forces, both Luna and Vextel knew that their unlikely meeting was about to change everything. The doctor had saved the life of her greatest enemy, and in doing so, had planted the first seed of doubt in the heart of a warrior who had never known mercy. 3 days had passed since the crash, and the situation was getting worse by the hour. Luna could hear the distant rumble of alien aircraft searching the area, getting closer to their hidden location. Through intercepted communications, she learned that General Croakter had taken command of the invasion force. Unlike his predecessor, this new commander showed no interest in taking prisoners or preserving human infrastructure. The orders were simple and terrifying: eliminate every human on the planet. Vextel was recovering faster than Luna had expected. His alien physiology was remarkably resilient, and the treatments she had improvised were working better than she had hoped. We could sit up now, and even walk short distances with support. But his healing came at the worst possible time. "Have to leave," he told her as she changed his bandages. "Croakter will send ground teams to search every building. When they find you here with me, they'll assume you're a spy." Luna didn't look up from her work. "And what will they assume about you?" "That I'm a traitor," he said quietly. "Which, I suppose, is becoming true." She paused in her work, studying his face. Over the past few days, she had watched something change in the alien commander. The cold, calculating look in his eyes had been replaced by something else: doubt. Perhaps, or maybe even regret. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you changing your mind about us?" Vextel was quiet for a long moment. "In my culture, we believe that strength comes from domination. The strong survive, the weak perish. It's the natural order." He gestured to his healing wounds. "But you saved me when I was weak." "You showed me kindness when you could have shown me vengeance. I don't understand it, but I can't ignore it either." Before Luna could respond, the building shook with a distant explosion. Through the windows, they could see smoke rising from the direction of the main settlement. The sounds of aircraft were getting closer, and Luna knew they were out of time. "There's a resistance base in the mountains," she said, gathering her medical supplies. "Some of the colonists made it there before the main attack. If we can reach them, ... we." Vextel looked at her in surprise. "I'm not leaving you behind," Luna said firmly. "You can barely walk, and you have information that could save lives. Besides," she added with a slight smile, "you're still my patient." Journey through the wilderness was harder than either of them had expected. Luna had to support most of Vextel's weight as they made their way through dense forest and rocky terrain. Several times they had to hide as alien patrol craft flew overhead, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. During one of their rest stops, huddled in a cave while enemy forces searched the area nearby, Vextel spoke quietly about his life as a warlord. "I've conquered 47 worlds," he told her. "Never thought about the people living on them. They were just obstacles to overcome, resources to claim. And now? Luna asked. Now I realized that every world had people like you. People who cared for others, who showed kindness even to their enemies, and I destroyed them all. His voice was filled with something Luna had never heard from him before. Genuine remorse. They encountered their first group of human survivors on the second day of their journey. A family of 5 parents and 3 children who had been hiding in an abandoned mining facility. The youngest child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, was running a high fever. Luna immediately went to work, diagnosing the girl with an infection that was common but treatable. She had antibiotics in her medical kit, but using them would deplete her already limited supplies. For a moment, she hesitated, thinking about the long journey ahead and the wounded people they might encounter. Vexel watched, her internal struggle with fascination. In his culture, resources were preserved for the strong, the valuable, the useful. A sick child from a conquered world would have been left to die without a second thought. But Luna never hesitated for long. Here, she said, preparing an injection. This will help with the infection. She should start feeling better in a few hours. The girl's mother was crying with relief, and her father kept trying to thank Luna in a dozen different ways. But what struck Vexel the most was how naturally the family accepted his presence. Yes, they were afraid of him at first, but Luna's calm acceptance of the alien commander seemed to put them at ease as they continued their journey together. Now, as a group of 7, Vexel began to understand something that had always puzzled him about humans. They weren't weak because they helped each other. They were strong because of it. The family shared their limited food with Luna and even offered some to him. They helped carry his weight when he stumbled, and they never complained about the slower pace his injuries required. Your people are remarkable, he told Luna as they made camp on their 3rd night. We always believed that your willingness to help others was a weakness to be exploited. But you're stronger together than any Zethkar unit I've ever commanded. Luna was checking on the little girl, who was already much better thanks to the antibiotics. Strength isn't just about being able to fight, she said. It's about being able to keep going when everything falls apart. It's about taking care of each other when the world seems to be ending. On the 4th day, they finally reached the resistance base, a hidden facility built into the mountainside. The guards were suspicious at first, especially when they saw Vexel, but Luna's reputation as a doctor preceded her. She was known throughout the colony for her skill and dedication. The base was home to nearly 300 survivors, including many wounded from the initial attack. Luna immediately went to work in their medical facility, treating injuries and organizing supplies. Vexel watched her move from patient to patient, treating each one with the same care and attention she had shown him. But it was during a strategy meeting with the resistance leaders that Vexel truly proved his transformation. About Zethkari tactics and weaknesses. Didn't hesitate to share detailed information about fleet positions, supply lines, and planned attacks. Why should we trust you? Asked Commander Hayes, the resistance leader who happened to be Luna's older brother. How do we know this isn't some elaborate trap? Before Vexel could answer, Luna spoke up. Because I've watched him change. I've seen him choose to help people instead of hurt them. I've seen him risk his life to protect a human family he just met. She looked directly at her brother. And because sometimes the best way to judge someone isn't by what they've done, but by what they choose to do when given a second chance. The meeting continued late into the night, with Vexel providing detailed intelligence about the invasion force. He revealed weakness in their formations, told them about supply convoys that could be ambushed, and warned them about planned attacks on other survivor settlements. As the resistance fighters began to see the value of his information, they started to view him differently. He wasn't just a prisoner or a source of intelligence. He was becoming an ally, someone who had chosen to stand with them against his own people. But even as plans were being made and hope was beginning to return, everyone knew that their situation was still desperate. The Zethkari forces were vast and well-equipped, while the human resistance was small and running out of supplies. They had bought themselves time, but time alone wouldn't be enough to save Haven's Rest. The real test would come when they had to put their new alliance to the test in actual battle. And that test was coming sooner than anyone expected. Life inside the resistance base was unlike anything Vexel had ever experienced. For weeks, he had been living among humans, watching their daily routines, their interactions, their way of handling crisis. What he saw challenged everything. He thought he knew about strength and leadership. The base was organized, but not in the rigid military structure he was used to. People took on roles based on their skills and the community's needs. Luna worked 18-hour days in the medical bay, treating everyone from wounded fighters to sick children. She never complained, never asked for special treatment, and never turned away anyone who needed help. But it wasn't just Luna. Vexel watched as a former teacher named Professor Chen organized classes for the children, making sure they continued learning even in the middle of a war. A mechanic called Tony worked around the clock to keep their vehicles and equipment running, sharing his knowledge with anyone willing to learn. An elderly woman named Rose, who had been a chef before the invasion, somehow managed to make nutritious meals for 300 people with limited supplies. These weren't soldiers or warriors in the traditional sense. They were ordinary people who had been forced into extraordinary circumstances, yet they functioned as a unit more effectively than many military organizations Vexel had commanded. "Your people fascinate me," he told Luna one evening as she finished treating a fighter who had been injured in a supply raid. "In my culture, we believe that conflict reveals true nature. The strong dominate, the weak submit. But here, I see something different." Luna was cleaning her instruments, her movements precise despite her exhaustion. "What do you see?" "I see people becoming stronger by helping others become strong. Makes no sense according to everything I was taught, yet I can't deny what I'm witnessing." Luna paused in her work. "Maybe that's because your culture has been looking at strength all wrong. Real strength isn't about being able to crush your enemies. It's about being able to lift up your allies." Over the following days, Vexel began participating more actively in the base's operations. His tactical knowledge proved invaluable in planning raids and defensive strategies. But more importantly, he started to understand the human approach to warfare. They fought not just to defeat their enemies, but to protect their people. During one planning session, the resistance leaders were debating whether to attack a Zethkari supply convoy. The tactical advantage was clear, but the convoy was traveling near a human settlement that still had civilians hiding in the ruins. "We can't risk civilian casualties," said Commander Hayes. "If we miss with even one rocket, we could kill innocent people. But if we don't stop that convoy, they'll use those supplies to attack the refugee camp in Sector 7, argued another fighter. "We're talking about saving 300 lives. The debate continued for hours, with no easy answers. In the Zethkari military, the decision would have been simple: take the shot and accept the collateral damage. But these humans were agonizing over every possible consequence. Vexel found himself speaking up. "There's another way," he said quietly. "The convoy will have to stop at checkpoint Delta 7 to refuel. Because if we position teams here and here," he pointed to locations on the map, "we can disable their vehicles without endangering the civilians." Plan was more complicated and riskier for the attackers, but it would guarantee the safety of innocent people. As the team prepared for the mission, Vexel realized he had just proposed a strategy that prioritized human lives over military efficiency. A few months ago, such thinking would have been impossible for him. The raid was a success. But it was what happened afterward that truly opened Vexel's eyes. Among the captured Zethkari supplies were medical equipment and food that was desperately needed by the resistance, but there were also items that would help the civilian population: water purification tablets, blankets, and basic medicines. Without hesitation, the resistance fighters distributed these supplies to the refugee camps, keeping only what they absolutely needed for their own operations. They gave away resources that could have made their own lives easier because they knew other people needed them more. "You're giving away strategic advantages," Vexel observed, watching as trucks loaded with supplies headed toward the civilian settlements. "We're not fighting to conquer," Luna replied, checking the manifest of medical supplies being distributed. "We're fighting to protect. What good is winning if we lose what makes us human in the process?" That night, the base came under attack. Zethkari ground forces had finally located their position and launched a coordinated assault. Alarms blared throughout the facility as defenders rushed to their positions. Vexthal found himself fighting alongside the humans, using his knowledge of Zethkari tactics to predict and counter their attacks. But it was during the fiercest part of the battle that he truly understood what Luna had been trying to teach him. A section of the base's medical bay was hit by enemy fire, trapping several wounded people inside. Without hesitation, human fighters abandoned their defensive positions to rescue the trapped civilians. They risked their lives not for strategic advantage, but simply because people needed help. Luna herself ran into the burning section to evacuate patients, refusing to leave anyone behind. When a piece of debris pinned her down, Vexthal didn't think twice. He charged through enemy fire to reach her, using his strength to lift the heavy metal beam and carry her to safety. Luna asked later as she treated a burn on his arm from the rescue. "You could have been killed, because you would have done the same for me," he replied. "You did do the same for me when you found me in that crashed ship." As dawn broke over the base, the Zethkari forces retreated, having failed to overrun the human position. But the victory came at a cost. Several defenders had been wounded. Their medical supplies were running low. Vexthal watched as the humans organized their response to the attack. There was no recrimination, no blame assigned for the casualties. Instead, people simply got to work, treating the wounded, repairing the damage, and preparing for the next attack. "In my culture," he told Luna, "failure is punished. Weakness is eliminated. Leaders maintain power through fear and domination. But here, I see people following leaders who serve them, not the other way around. That's because we understand something your people don't," Luna said, organizing medical supplies with practiced efficiency. "Power isn't something you take from others. It's something you give to others. You help someone become stronger. You become stronger too." As the day progressed, Vexthal reflected on how much he had changed. The warrior who had once conquered worlds through fear and brutality was now fighting alongside those he had once considered enemies. He wasn't just fighting for military objectives anymore. He was fighting for people, for families, for the chance to protect something beautiful and precious. But even as he embraced this new understanding, Vexthal knew that the real test was still to come. The resistance was strong, but General Croctor's forces were vast and well-equipped. Soon they would face a challenge that would require more than just courage and determination. They would need a miracle. And sometimes, miracles required the ultimate sacrifice. The intercepted transmission arrived at dawn, and its contents sent shockwaves through the resistance base. Luna watched the color drain from Commander Hayes' face as he read the decoded message. The news was worse than anyone had imagined. Dare. Bringing in the World Breaker, he announced to the gathered leaders, "General Croctor has requested permission to use orbital bombardment weapons that will sterilize the entire planet." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. The World Breaker wasn't just a weapon, it was a tool of complete annihilation. It would turn Haven's Rest into a lifeless rock, destroying every living thing on the surface. "How long do we have?" asked Professor Chen, his voice barely above a whisper. 72 hours, Hayes replied. "The weapon needs time to charge and position itself in orbit." Vexthal felt his blood run cold. He had heard of the World Breaker, but had never seen it deployed. The Empire only used it when they wanted to send a message to other worlds about the cost of resistance. Usually, the mere threat was enough to ensure surrender. "We need to evacuate," said Tony, the mechanic. "Get as many people off-world as possible." "With what ships?" Hayes asked bitterly. "We have 3 small transport vessels. They might be able to carry 300 people. There are still over 50,000 humans hiding across this planet." Luna had been quiet during the discussion. But now, she spoke up. "What if we could stop the weapon instead of running from it?" The room turned to look at her. "Luna, that's impossible," her brother said gently. "The World Breaker is protected by the entire Zethkari fleet. We don't have enough ships or fighters to even get close. But we do have something they don't expect," she said, looking directly at Vexthal. We have someone who knows their systems, their protocols, their weaknesses. All eyes turned to the former warlord. Vexel understood immediately what Luna was suggesting, and his heart began to race. "You want me to infiltrate the fleet?" he said slowly. "Could you do it?" asked Hayes. "Could you get close enough to sabotage the weapon?" Vexel was quiet for a long moment, thinking through the possibilities. It would be difficult, but not impossible. "I could claim that I was captured and tortured, that I escaped during the last attack on this base. Croakter would be suspicious. But he needs experienced commanders. If I played my role carefully, ... and then what?" asked Professor Chen. "Even if you could get aboard the command ship, how would you disable something that powerful?" "The Worldbreaker has a critical weakness," Vextel explained. "It requires a continuous power feed from the ship's main reactor. If someone could access the power coupling during the charging sequence and introduce a feedback loop, the weapon would overload and destroy itself." "Along with the ship," Hayes said grimly, "and anyone on it." The implication hung in the air like a physical weight. What they were discussing wasn't just a mission, it was a one-way trip. Vexel would be walking into the heart of the enemy fleet with no way home. "No," Luna said firmly. "We're not sending you on a suicide mission. There has to be another way." "There isn't," Vexel replied quietly. "We both know it." The argument that followed was intense and emotional. Luna refused to accept that sacrifice was the only option. She proposed alternative plans, raids on supply lines, attempts to evacuate more people, even a direct assault on the fleet. Everyone in the room knew the truth. Nothing else would work. "This is exactly what they want," Luna said, her voice shaking with frustration. "They want us to throw away our lives in desperate gestures. They want us to become like them, willing to sacrifice anything for victory." "No," Vexel said, standing up and moving to face her. "This is exactly what makes you different from them. You're not willing to sacrifice innocent people for strategic advantage. You're willing to sacrifice yourselves to protect others. It's not becoming like them, that's proving you're better than them." The debate continued for hours, but eventually, reality set in. They had limited options, and even less time. The Worldbreaker would be in position soon, and when it fired, every human on Haven's Rest would die that evening. As the base prepared for what might be their final night, Vextel found Luna in the medical bay. She was organizing supplies with mechanical precision, but he could see the tension in her movements. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "Now, let me save yours." Luna didn't look up from her work. "I didn't save your life so you could throw it away. You saved my life so I could learn what it means to be truly alive," he replied. "And I've learned that being alive isn't about surviving, it's about having something worth dying for." She finally looked at him, and he could see tears. In her eyes, "You don't have to prove anything to me. You've already changed. You've already become better than what you were." "I know," he said, "but now I need to become more than what I am. I need to become what this moment requires." The next morning, Vextel began his preparations. He studied the fleet positions, memorized security protocols, and planned his approach. But the hardest part was saying goodbye to the people who had become his family. The resistance fighters who had once viewed him with suspicion now shook his hand and wished him luck. Professor Chen gave him a small device that would help him navigate the ship's computer systems. Tony provided him with tools disguised as medical equipment. Even the children drew pictures for him to carry, colorful drawings of spaceships and stars and home. But it was his final conversation with Luna that nearly broke his resolve. She had prepared a medical kit for him, filled with supplies he might need during his infiltration. "Promise me something," she said, her voice barely controlled. "Promise me you'll try to find a way to survive this. Promise me you won't just throw your life away." "I promise I'll try," he said, and meant it. "But I also promise that I won't let your people die if I can prevent it." Luna reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph, a picture of her family taken before the invasion. "This is what you're fighting for," she said. "Not just the people on this base, but everyone like them, everyone who chooses. Kindness over cruelty, hope over despair." As Vextel prepared to leave the base, He carried with him more than just equipment and plans. He carried the memory of every kindness he had witnessed, every act of courage he had seen, every moment of human compassion that had transformed him from a destroyer into a protector. The shuttle that would take him to the rendezvous point was small and fast, designed to avoid detection. As it lifted off from the hidden base, Vextel looked down at the mountain facility that had become his home. Somewhere in those tunnels, Luna was probably treating patients. Professor Chen was teaching children, and Tony was fixing something that needed fixing. They were all counting on him now, not just to save their lives, but to prove that the lesson Luna had taught him, that mercy was stronger than cruelty, that love was stronger than hate, was true. The real test was about to begin. The Zethkari rescue shuttle found Vextel drifting in a damaged escape pod exactly where he had planned. His appearance was carefully crafted, bruised, weakened, and appearing to be barely alive. When the rescue team pulled him aboard, he played his role perfectly, mumbling about torture and escape while maintaining the persona of a broken commander. General Proctor was waiting when they brought Vextel to the flagship's medical bay. The younger commander had always been ambitious and suspicious, viewing Vextel as both a rival and a legend. Now, seeing his former superior in such a weakened state, Proctor's eyes gleamed with a mixture of concern and opportunity. "Commander." "Vextel," Proctor said, approaching the medical bed. "We thought you were dead. What happened down there?" Vextel forced his voice to sound weak and bitter. "The humans. They captured me from the wreckage, kept me alive for interrogation. They wanted information about our fleet positions, our strategies." He paused, as if the memory was painful. "I told them nothing, of course, but they tried to break me." It was a carefully constructed lie, designed to explain any changes in his behavior while maintaining his reputation as a loyal Zethkari. Officer Proctor listened intently, occasionally asking questions that Vextel answered with practiced deception. "How did you escape?" Proctor asked. "During their last attack on the base, there was confusion. I managed to overpower a guard and steal an escape pod. I've been drifting for hours, waiting for rescue." Over the next few hours, as Vextel was debriefed and examined by the ship's medical staff, he carefully gathered information about the World Breaker's status. The weapon was almost fully charged, positioned in perfect orbit above Haven's Rest. In less than 18 hours, it would fire, and everything on the planet's surface would be destroyed. But Vextel also learned something that chilled him too: the bone. The weapon wasn't just intended for Haven's Rest. Proctor had convinced the Empire's high command that human resistance was spreading to other worlds. After destroying this planet, the fleet would move on to 3 other human colonies, using the World Breaker to eliminate them as well. Millions of innocent people would die unless he could stop this madness. As night fell aboard the massive warship, Vextel made his way through corridors he had once walked as a conqueror. Now he moved as a saboteur, carrying with him the tools Tony had provided and the determination Luna had inspired. Every step brought him closer to the ship's power core, where the World Breaker drew its deadly energy. The corridors were familiar, but everything felt different now. He passed crew members who saluted him with respect, unaware that he was planning to destroy everything they served. He saw young soldiers who reminded him of the human fighters in the resistance base. Brave, dedicated, but following orders without questioning their morality. When he finally reached the power core chamber, Vextel found it lightly guarded. The Zethkari had never considered the possibility of sabotage from within their own ranks. After all, why would anyone want to destroy such a powerful weapon? Working quickly, but carefully, Vextel accessed the power coupling that fed energy to the World Breaker. Using the tools Tony had hidden in his medical kit, he began to install the feedback device Professor Chen had designed. It was delicate. One mistake would trigger alarms throughout the ship. As he worked, Vextel thought about everything that had led him to this moment. The crash that should have killed him. Luna's inexplicable kindness in saving his life. The gradual awakening of his conscience as he witnessed human courage and compassion. The choice to stand with his former enemies against his own people. The device was almost in place when footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Vextel quickly sealed the access panel and composed himself just as Croakter entered the chamber with 2 guards. Commander Croakter said, his voice suspicious. "What are you doing here?" Inspecting the weapon, Vextel replied calmly.
I
"Wanted to see the power core that will finally end human resistance once and for all." Croakter studied him carefully. "You seem different since your capture. More... thoughtful. The humans didn't break you, did they?" For a moment, Vexel considered, telling him the truth about Luna's kindness, about the strength he had witnessed in human compassion, about the transformation that had turned him from destroyer to protector. But he knew Croakter would never understand. "They tried," he said instead. "They failed. If anything, seeing their weakness up close has made me more determined to see them eliminated." Satisfied with this answer, Croakter dismissed his guards and moved closer to the power core. In 6 hours, the World Breaker will fire. Haven's Rest will become a lifeless rock, and every other human world will know the price of resistance. And after that, Vexel asked, though he already knew the answer, we move to the next system. 3 more worlds, 3 more examples. By the time we're finished, no species in the galaxy will dare oppose the Empire. As Croakter spoke about the planned destruction of entire civilizations, Vexel felt something he had never experienced before, a complete rejection of everything his culture represented. These weren't military targets or strategic objectives. They were homes filled with families like the ones he had met in the Resistance base. "I need to make a final broadcast to the fleet," Vexel said, "to inspire them before the weapon fires." Croakter nodded approvingly. "Excellent idea. The crew will benefit from hearing from a legendary commander." An hour later, as the World Breaker entered its final charging sequence, Vexel stood before the ship's main communication array. Throughout the fleet, thousands of Zethkari soldiers waited to hear from the hero who had returned from captivity. Instead, they heard something that would change the course of galactic history. "Warriors of the Empire," Vexel began, his voice carrying to every ship in the fleet and being recorded for transmission across Zethkari space, "I speak to you not as your commander, but as someone who has seen the truth about ourselves and our enemies." Alarms began to sound as Croakter realized what was happening, but it was too late to stop the broadcast. "We call the humans weak because they show mercy. We call them inferior because they help those who cannot help themselves. But I have lived among them, and I have learned that we are the weak ones. We are the inferior ones. We have mistaken cruelty for strength and brutality. For courage, security forces were rushing toward the communication center. But Vexel continued speaking, his words being transmitted across the galaxy. True strength is not the ability to destroy your enemies. True strength is the ability to show mercy. When you have the power to take revenge, true courage is not conquering worlds. It's choosing to protect those who need protection, even when it costs you everything." The chamber doors burst open as Croakter and his guards stormed in, weapons drawn. But Vexel's final message was already being transmitted. "The weapon I helped to create is about to fire, but it will not destroy the spirit of those it targets. It will not extinguish the light that shines in beings who choose love over hate, hope over despair, and it will be the last world killer we ever use, because I choose to stop it here." As Croakter's weapon fired, Vexel activated the feedback device he had installed in the power core. The World Breaker's energy turned back on itself, creating a cascade failure that tore through the ship's systems. The massive vessel shuddered and groaned as its own power destroyed it from within. In the medical bay of the Resistance base, Luna heard the explosion echo across the sky. She watched through the window as the Zethkari flagship became a brief, brilliant star before fading into darkness. She knew, without being told, that Vexel had succeeded, and she knew, with equal certainty, that he was gone. But his final message continued to spread across the galaxy, reaching Zethkar worlds where citizens heard, for the first time, a different vision of what their empire could become. It reached human colonies where hope had been nearly extinguished, reminding them that even their greatest enemies could choose redemption. Years later, When the Zethkar Empire finally ended its campaigns of conquest and began the long process of learning to coexist with other species, historians would point to many factors that led to the change. But most would agree that it began with a single broadcast from a warlord who learned that true strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the courage to protect. Luna kept the photograph he had carried, the picture of her family that represented everything worth fighting for. And sometimes, when new medical students asked her about the importance of treating all patients with equal care, she would tell them about an alien commander who came to her as an enemy and died as the greatest hero she had ever known. The human who refused to let her enemy die, and the warlord whose final choice made him a legend, became a story that spread across the stars, proof that compassion could triumph over cruelty, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon against darkness is simply refusing to let it win.